So in my work, often try to get people to think about it from the why. And the reason the why matters is it will motivate people to be different. And as we just spoke about women and girls, one of the things I wanted to mention is that if you come at we should empower women and girls from a we should empower women and girls, you know how many people roll their eyes? But if you come at it from, hey, folks, did you know that teams make better decisions when women and girls are at the table? Did you know that humans are more innovative when women and girls at the table? Did you know that environmental decisions are made in a better manner if there's inclusivity of all voices? And this holds all diversity. This is not just women and girls, racial diversity, ethnic, geographic. And that's, for me, that's my why.
Hello, and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abbie, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Mil Niepold as we take a communication perspective on creating grains of empowerment for women and girls. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we embody curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Mil Niepold. I first met Mil at the Do Power Differently online course put on by the Omega Institute last year in 2024. And I've really been wanting to continue the conversation with her ever since. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to do that. Mil has done just so many wonderful things in the world, acting as a board director, mediator, and international ESG supply chain strategist. She is, in everything she does, focused on finding solutions that address climate change while also improving human rights. That's a little bit about Mil. You'll hear more about her from her in just a moment. Mil is one of those people who I like to describe as being CMM-ish without knowing it, and now she does know it. This conversation fits in really beautifully with the other conversations we've been having recently, with a big focus on design and how we design the spaces that we enter into together, and how what we're creating is shaped by the kind of tone we've set, the way that we have invited people to be together in spaces. So I'm so happy to be sharing this conversation with you, and let's jump right into it with Mil. Hello, Mil. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hello, Abbie. I'm so happy to be here.
I am really thrilled to be finally having this conversation with you. It's been a long time in the making, since we first met at the Omega Institute doing an online course. And I just remember that your perspective and the work that you do really resonated with me from the start, and enjoyed having conversations with you in that group and out of that group that we had. And the context that I have in my mind as we're having this conversation, and like I said, finally having this conversation, is that a lot has happened since you and I did this course together. And so the work that you do felt urgent then, and it feels even more urgent now, is my impression. And I'm really, really just looking forward to hearing the stories that you have to share today, and learn as much as I can about the work that you do and kind of why it matters. And the business I feel like I'm in is equipping and empowering, is what I really hope to do with the communication tools, with a communication perspective, equip and empower people to create better social worlds. That's always my lens. And so I see your work is fitting into that very nicely as well. So answering the question, how are you arriving, Mil? Please share.
Thanks, Abbie. And also just to say, I so appreciate the context of what you brought and also what you do. And I too loved meeting you through Omega. And it's just been a highlight of that course to be here with you right now. So How am I arriving? First of all, I love the question. I think second of all, I'm arriving fresh out of bronchitis.
Hmm.
And being truthful, I feel a little heavy. Today would have been a wedding anniversary for me.
Mm.
I chose this day intentionally because I wanted to shift the vibes,
Yes.
after a 28-year relationship. I thought this would be the perfect way to flip the switch. And so that's how I'm arriving as somebody who's excited to be here and explore something new together with you.
Well, I'm honored you would choose to spend this day with me, Mil. I really
Mhm.
appreciate it. And yeah, just let's dive right in. So tell us more about
Absolutely.
yourself, Mil. Please introduce yourself and
Mhm.
you pick and choose what are the stories, what are the things that you want us to know about you that feel relevant for you to want us to know going into this conversation specifically.
Yeah. So thanks. So my background is actually always at the intersection of multiple things. I frequently describe it as a triangle.
Hmm.
In the very, very, very beginning, I studied international affairs, but the journey to that actually was different because I thought, oh, political science. Quickly realized that without the engagement of the private sector or civil
Mm.
society, what was politics?
Yeah.
And I was 17 when I thought that. Now, that's not about tooting my own horn. That's about look where we are today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like a eureka, a true eureka moment to say, where are we with civil society? Where are we with our business partners?
Yeah.
What can we do to bring communities together? And that's what I've always been about. So, in the short answer, I work with nonprofits, I work with communities, I work with governments, and I work with the private sector, all together to bring a dialogue to the table where all voices are included equally. And we'll talk a lot more about why bringing voices together matters. And I do, in fact, have certain stories. And throughout my entire career, I've always, inevitably, because of my supply chain work, my human rights work, there's always been a focus on women and girls.
Mm.
And those are the best stories that I'm going to bring to this table today.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And that's something I think that I'm starting to maybe have my own aha moment of for myself. And I'm surrounded by a lot of great people who are really invested in this work as well. Like Robin Penman is involved with the CMM Institute. She's just written a book, Justice in the Making, and it uses this language of participative democracy.
Oh,
Another colleague of mine, Don Weissenen, is like an improv guy, which I just love that perspective coming into it. And he has a book, Improv for Democracy. And it is the
oh.
same perspective that you have, that democracy isn't this thing that's out there
Mhm.
that was signed into law in our constitution and
Mhm.
we're totally separate from. It is this like living, breathing thing that we are participating in, that we create. And so I think that we're
Mm,
in a moment where we're really bumping up against, ooh, maybe we've taken this for granted. And it's a
mm,
moment for us to really reflect on, how do we create democracy together and what is required of us.
right. And Abby, I would actually just build on that. It's also, in addition to the how,
Mhm.
I love to focus on the why.
Mm.
Because if you ask people, hey, look at our democracy, it's in tatters. Look at democracies, I mean, authoritarian regimes are popping up all over the world. Now there's a
Mhm.
new one, hypothetically, in Romania.
Mm.
And before that, it was Hungary, and da 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 da. And the list, sadly, just keeps growing.
Mhm.
So in my work, often try to get people to think about it from the why. And the reason the why matters is it will motivate people to be different.
Mm.
And as we just spoke about women and girls, one of the things I wanted to mention is that if you come at we should empower women and girls from a we should empower women and girls, you know how many people roll their eyes?
Mm.
Well, 50% of humanity rolls their eyes, and you
Mm.
know who I mean. But if you come at it from, hey, folks, did you know that teams make better decisions when women and girls are at the table? Did you know that humans are more innovative when women and girls at the table? Did you know that environmental decisions are made in a better manner if there's inclusivity of all voices? And this holds all diversity. This is not
Mhm.
just women and girls, racial diversity, ethnic, geographic. And that's, for me, that's my why.
Mm. Mm.
We're better. We're better. We're better at everything humans need to do. And if we talk about climate change, happens to be one of the things I work on, you can't just say we should do this because
Mhm.
we've been saying we should for 50 years.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's jump right into the stories as how I'm
Yeah.
feeling. I want to know your experiences that you've had because one frame that I'll offer from a communication perspective, and I've offered this before and I understand that it's a little simplistic, but I think it's a helpful place to start because the whole of CMM is essentially meaning is socially constructed and we
Mhm.
are the active participants that create it. And I think that is really important for people to kind of wrap their mind around at first, to say there is not one way, there is not one story, there is not always one
Mm.
meaning. And so I'm interested in a kind of distinction as a place for us to start between an old story and a new story. And again, I know it's
Mm.
not that simple, but if you were going to use that frame, I'm curious about the kind of interactions or experiences you've
Mhm.
had where you enter into a space where you're bumping up against this, what I'm calling this old story that's
Mm.
emerged for a number of reasons in our the society that you and I share, at least, which is patriarchal,
Mhm.
that has created this old story that is leaving
Mm.
women and girls, that is leaving other people of other races and ethnicities,
Mhm.
sexualities, and genders
Mhm.
out of the conversation and out of the table. And so, as you bump
Right.
up against that old story, I'm curious to hear the experiences you've had around bringing a new story into the conversation and how that's been received.
Mm. So, Abby, love the question about old stories and new stories. You mentioned patriarchy, so that is actually, I think, a super useful handle for many, many kinds of old stories. Because I do a lot of work in the private sector, but always again in that triangle, the private sector is one actor,
Hmm. Hmm.
government, civil society. The old story was we have human rights violations occurring in our supply chain.
Mm.
And we, whether it's governments from the United States or Europe, we, the company, we, the brand, you name it, we're going to go in and we are going to build a school and it's going to end child labor. Okay, I've worked in child labor my entire career. Love the concept in the sense of we're trying.
Hmm.
We genuinely are trying.
Yeah.
So I can't fault that. But the story that matters is what if we're wrong? What if we don't know what would end child labor? Well, turns out after 25 years in the field, we don't actually
Mm.
know that much. But here's the things we do know that work, we are blinded to them
Mm.
because of gender bias. And I'll explain. So, the typical approach to ending child labor is you go in, you build schools, and you say, great, now the kids will come. Well, guess what? That doesn't happen. What does happen is when you empower women and they earn more money, they spend that money on sending, wait for it, their children to school.
Hmm.
So if you come in with a patriarchal, we know what's best, we're going to do this bricks and mortar solution, you will be wrong. We have been wrong. And the story that makes me so excited is a project I worked on with Mondelez, formerly Kraft. The owners, many people know them, but many people don't. They own Cadbury and Oreo and all the things. Mondelez had a program called Cocoa Life. In this program, they invested very heavily in women and girls empowerment. The story that never leaves me is that there was a program to train 18 to 25-year-old young women to be extension volunteers to help with agriculture. And I was in a village once and I said, okay, these women who are known as weaves, women extension volunteer, where are they? We're here with hundreds of villagers. Where are these women? And somebody said to me, oh, you'll know it when they get here. I said, well, that's not very specific, but
Ominous.
okay. Ominous, right? Sure enough, I was standing there, and out of the corner of my eye, I see about 8 women with the best posture I had ever seen,
Mm.
with their heads held high, their shoulders back, marching into the middle of the community, in front of the tribal leaders, in front of the elders, in front of the queen mothers, in front of, and I thought, oh boy, I bet those are the ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure enough, I asked, and what I learned in talking not just to the women themselves, but to the community was that these women, when they were trained in extension volunteering for agriculture, they took the knowledge and said, okay, great, but I can do more than that.
Mm,
And a third of them, Abbie, ran for office.
wow.
No one, and this is where we go back to patriarchy, no one came in and said, you shall run for office. We shall train you to run for office. They
Mhm.
had what I'd like to call maybe a grain of empowerment, took that information, ran with it, ran for office. And of the third who ran for office, a third of them won.
Wow.
And that gives me goosebumps. It makes me happy. I never forget it. There are parallels to other projects I've done much more recently with women fighting climate change in Zimbabwe. But you can ask me more stories, more
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
later, but I do have others.
Yeah, yeah, I think that is such a wonderful story and something that I continue to think about in my own realm of things in terms of the language I just used, equipping and empowering, is that yeah, helping people,
Mhm.
equipping people, empowering people. There's a maybe shadow side to some of that that you've named, which is I know what you need.
Right.
And what I hope to bring in conversations that I have, because I do think part of what I do is around educating people too, and just literally saying, you did not have this language, these tools before.
Mhm.
I want to offer you this language so that you can use it how you need to. And so it's kind of
Mm.
like offering the container or offering the lens, and then you make the sense, you make the meaning of your experiences, you make the choices using this lens that hopefully is helpful because it's language that names things that we maybe weren't naming before.
Mm. Oh, I fully agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your story. And I want to hear more. But I think one thing I'm curious about before we get deeper into these other experiences you've had as the person kind of coming in and helping facilitate a kind of intervention or whatever you'd call that is you named starting in a world of political science,
Hmm.
getting into a different perspective around the other parts of that system that need to participate. What was the jump to what you do now and having
Hmm.
the experiences that you had, again, maybe not on the side that you're on now, which is the I'm the one coming in and saying, hey,
Hmm.
all the things you just said. Hey, did you know that if you empower women and girls,
Mm.
before you were the person doing that, what were the experience you had that kind of taught you this or made you believe it
Mm.
or made you feel so passionate about this work?
Right. Well, I think let's start. I love the word jump that you
Mm-hmm.
use because I look back now and it really, really did feel like
Mm.
a jump. So when I went in to study political science at George Washington, great school, love it to death. But I went in and I said, great, I'm going to go to Washington. So I chose only schools in Washington. I'm going to study political science, and I marched myself off to an internship on Capitol Hill. Well, haha. 3 months later, 3 months later, and all the cliches about sexual harassment
Mm.
100% happened. All the things that you read about, the darkest, the deepest, all the things you hear
Wow.
happened. But I was not daunted by that. What I did was, and I remember the moment so clearly, I went to watch them having a floor vote on, in the House of Representatives as an intern and watched the voting. And the eureka moment was, well, hang on, we're passing all of these laws, but who's here? Only a handful of voices, a handful of perspectives. And when you enact a law, you need resources to deliver on the
Mm-hmm.
law. And that was the moment when I said, well, not only do I have to really think hard about participatory democracy and who is and isn't in the room, I also really am curious about how we're going to pay for all of this.
Mm.
And at that moment, I went back and changed my major to international affairs at the Elliott School, reason being that international affairs was an amalgam of economics,
Mm.
geography, history, and political science.
Yeah, right.
And that is what made me, that was the jumping off point. That was the starting point to participatory fill in the blank everything
Mm-hmm.
and finding the way to pay for it. Second piece of that story you asked me was not just sort of the jumping off point, but also I think it was something about you said about how I got to be where I am today without mentioning all the things. So I think the beginning of realizing that people were missing was the beginning of recognizing the power of listening. Because if people are missing, then you automatically have to say to yourself, ah, their voices are missing. And that I didn't realize it at the time because I went headlong into human rights work
Mm-hmm.
in global supply chains. But throughout the entire period of my career so far, it wasn't just human rights work. It was who's here? Do they have a say? Do they influence decision making?
Mm-hmm.
Are they beyond just a token person in the corner? And are we really and truly listening to them? And that has been the hallmark of my career.
Okay, I'm really interested in two kind of stories I'm hearing, which is the logistical, how do we make this happen, and who's here, and who's making it happen, how are we paying for making it happen? And then your own experience of what I'm hearing of just, I've been probably oversimplification, but again, what I'm hearing is you paying attention to something and
Mm-hmm.
then choosing to be mindful about it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
some of these things, like including everybody at the table and being
Mm-hmm.
relational, like some people think that's fluff, or people
Yeah.
think that's maybe political too and
Mm-hmm.
polarizing. And how do we do that? Where do we start? But I'm just interested in the kind of example or modeling that you're
Mm-hmm.
setting for us of just do it. Like, just, you can choose what if you see something that feels like a problem to you, or feels like there's a
Mm-hmm.
disparity there, you can choose to kind of trust yourself that you're correct in what you're seeing. And then what it seems like you've done is lean into that and address that
Mm-hmm.
and kind of go
Mm-hmm.
after that and make the conscious choice to do that, instead of the maybe beating around the bush of, well, I don't know, it's the way it's done, it's the way it's not been done, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, no, that's absolutely true. I think the first piece of this for me, it had always, because that story I just told you about Capitol Hill, I was 17. So it's real clear that that was instinct. There's
Yeah,
no way
yes.
that that was education,
Right.
right? And I could even go back to sort of middle school, and I remember even being 12 and being on the playground and saying, "But why? People are
Mm-hmm.
missing.
Mm.
People aren't together. They aren't, in community. They're in cliques." And anyone who's been to school
Yeah.
knows that cliques are a thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's let's say the instinct piece.
Mm.
Maybe, right? I've always wanted to be a singer. I am not a singer. I wish, right, that I could sing like, pick an example, Brandy Carlisle,
Mhm, mhm.
but I don't. So people across the world, the beautiful thing about humanity is we are all great at different things.
Mhm.
And that means we have different instincts. So I may have an instinct towards inclusivity. So far, so good. But right after instinct comes learning.
Mhm.
You don't have to have the instinct to actually just read.
Yeah.
Read what is written, read what we know to be true, read what voices around the world are saying. In my particular case, throughout my career, some of the research that has been most meaningful to me is on the inclusion and the power of good governance and innovation that derives from that. That's research out of MIT, Thomas Malone. However, what's interesting is that you can look at the aftermath of genocide in Rwanda and look at the way they handled reconciliation, and the community-based models they use, you can see echoes of that in the work of Thomas Malone, or you could see echoes of that in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid. What you'll see if you go around the globe, and again, I know Africa better than I know, say, for example, Asia. I do work there, but there are models in I'm sure, every continent.
Mm-hmm.
But the commonality is who's here, who's missing, who are we listening to, and who has power. And if you want to see truth, if you want to see reconciliation, if you want to see, my other personal favorite is a negotiated agreement that lasts into the future and doesn't end the day the ink is dry. You see this in War and Peace. You see it over land use. A negotiated agreement is only as good as it delivers value over time.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we also know is that an agreement fails when women aren't at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's research we could go into, we don't have time for,
Yeah.
but just to say that these commonalities exist globally.
Yeah. Yeah. As a fellow former political science major, I too went into college as political science and then very quickly was like, these aren't my people, I think was my experience. But I think maybe in a similar way to what you experienced, I was like, there's something under this. This is not the thing. There's something under the thing. And for me, it was communication. That I'm like, this is the smallest common denominator of everything. I think was kind of, I'm looking for the truest thing, the realest thing at the heart of all of this. And for me, that was communication. And that feels very like parallel to the experience you're having. And, you know, there's a lot of ways that I could probably name or make sense of the stories you tell in the experience you have through a communication lens, through and another lens that I've been exploring and learning about a lot lately is like systemic design too, and thinking about in our communication, in our relationships, in our dialogues, in our communities, how are we designing so that that communication that's really generative, that's really transformative can happen between people. You're getting excited, so I'll just pause there.
No. What I love about that is that it's amazing to me that I've spoken for maybe 30 minutes and didn't use the word dialogue, I don't think. That's normally one of my favorite words. So 100% agree with you. The work that you're doing in communication and dialogue is actually it's the same. I'm coming at it from the mechanical side of building a negotiation. You're coming at it from the human and the communication side, but they are two sides of basically the same human coin. And I'm also getting excited too, because I love what you're doing and I love the work that you do.
Yeah. And I think I'm so happy to be talking to you today and share these stories.
Yep.
As you talk about community, one thing that's coming to mind too, in these community-based solutions, and that's what we need, and that's what we've seen work. I just have a sense of this thing that we need the most is the thing that we are lacking the most right now. Like well-connected community. I was going to list more things, but well-connected community is this thing that we need the most. It's the thing that we're like, I feel so disconnected, I think, from a sense of like making change happen at a community level because I don't know all my neighbors, or we're not in conversation together, or there's not systems in place around me to connect us and make us feel empowered in our communities. And so I'm curious what you think about maybe the kind of distance between the reality of where most people are in relationship to their community or lack of community and these kind of community-based solutions that you're talking about. And maybe you have a specific experience or story of like, came in, there's not well connected, but this is the dialogue that happened, or this is the facilitation that happened of kind of like, I guess my question is like, how do we go from one to the other?
Oh, such a big, huge question.
Yeah, just an
And
easy little thing.
just a little woo. But, you know, it's such a jumble of ideas. So I may not be the most organized in my answer, but I'm going to toss out a few things that are on my mind. One, you know that there's research about rural versus urban, and and voting patterns track literally on the basis of distance from your neighbor. And so where the distance is the highest, you have the most alienation, where extremism, white nationalism, all the, things that are happening. And yeah, again, I'm speaking in the US context. I happen to work mostly globally, which is why some of my answer is a little
Yeah.
disorganized. So there's that. So could you say, we all need to move into cities? Well, the truth is, from a climate standpoint, the answer to that is actually yes. We need higher density living in order to face our future. I'm going to set that aside. The other thing, so I don't have an answer. I'm not going to say, let's all move into cities. That's the answer. That's not the answer.
Right.
And that's never going to happen. So I wish I could say I had an answer in the US context. And if I talk too much about the US context, I'm not going to get through this. I'm going to burst into tears
Yeah.
and it
Yes.
won't work.
Right.
However, in the US context, I cannot say, let's all move into the cities and we'll live happily ever after, even though truthfully, the research would say that. That's not going to happen. But I will say this: climate change is obviously not our friend, but it is going to force a change in the way we relate to community.
Yeah.
Now, you can call that a silver lining. Given the magnitude of the changes that are happening, I wouldn't even call it a silver lining. But what I will say is that there are, I don't know if you've heard of these climate resilience hubs are popping up across the United States. And I believe there's an institution called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, USDN, I believe is the institution. Anyone who cares to look it up, the climate resilience hubs are community-based models for, Philadelphia, where I live. We had some extreme flooding that was incredibly invasive and not expected and not well planned for, where one of the highways that runs through the city became, and I shudder to say this, a swimming pool.
Yeah.
That even though it was a highway with tires and pollution, people chose to swim in it during a flood. Don't recommend that. So Vine Street, for anyone listening who knows Philadelphia, became a swimming pool. Well, in the aftermath of these extreme weather events, anywhere in the world, people are going to need not only diapers and food and access to better information about how to plan for the flood and the whatever. So what I'm saying is they're going to need climate-related, flood-related, wind-related tools, but they also need human things. So the Climate Resilience Hub is something that I'm a big, big fan of, and anyone who wants to have a sense of where's something where I can hang my hat, learn more, do more, be more, build more, that's one thing that's really on my mind. Skipping all the way out of Philadelphia and into the Pacific, I'm doing a project for the Asian Development Bank. They have an amazing program called AWLP, which is the Asia Women Leaders Program. It is also known as the PWLP, Pacific Women Leaders Program.
Okay.
The reason this matters is that we can all say we need more women at the table, like the UN climate negotiations. Great. But the women in the Pacific, from countries like the Marshall Islands, Palau, all these countries, their nation is no longer almost a nation because the entire place is going underwater. So the reason this matters to all of us is that these women in the Pacific have been leading at the UN climate change things. They've been leading around the world. I don't want to use the phrase canary in a coal mine, but I'm going to.
Sure.
The point is, we have an opportunity right now to leap into a future that is already hitting certain people faster than others. And if a woman from an island nation in the Pacific says we need to do X or Y or Z differently, it would behoove humanity to listen to them. So my plea is to say, not only we can do better, we have issues. I mean, I literally had an entire window blow in my home in a regular storm. It wasn't a hurricane, not the glass, the wood. The entire frame blew in, fell out of the wall in a regular storm. So if we want to be ready for the future that's coming, this is why listening to people matters. And I would just say this, listening to women matters the most.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Specifically, what does it look like to
Mhm.
empower women and girls?
Yeah. So very specifically, what it means is the nuts and bolts of every room that you, I often say this in trainings, every room you go into, that room could be a board meeting, that room could be a community, that room could actually be a space under a tree in Africa. Doesn't have to be a room. The first step for men and women and all people who identify, and I want to, let's be expansive here. The way people identify, whatever your gender identity is, anywhere on a spectrum, you arrive to a space with your own background and notice who's not there. That's step one. Step two is getting the missing voices there. Well, you can't just complain. You can't just say, hey,
Hmm.
people have tried this. Hey, we need more women. Doesn't work because of gender bias. But you can build allies. And I frequently say, if you can find an ally in the room who may be, for example, a man, ask him to do the inviting for you.
Hmm.
I often say, you may be the right message, but you may not be the right messenger.
Hmm.
And so that's step two. The other thing is step three is the why. We talked about at the top of this podcast, the why. If the why is we need more women, and here's the research on feminism, and don't get me wrong, I'm a feminist too, but using a feminist argument, I'm very sorry to say this, doesn't move men,
Hmm.
in my experience. What does move men, the ones I've dealt with in corporate and government and all the things, is governance, innovation, team performance, all of the things that make society, businesses, governments, and all of them tick better. The research is there. So when I talk to other women, I say, be careful and very thoughtful about which arguments you use. So find a different ally, get your message across through the right messenger, and use research. It can be your friend, but be very thoughtful about which research you use. And again, I'll wrap up by saying it all begins with the awareness of who's missing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And this is a great moment to apply a communication perspective because it can be easy, I think, to trip ourselves up and just kind of sometimes myself, just want to sit down and throw a little tantrum of the like, of course, be the person that you're saying,
Duh.
I just want to say we should empower women and girls, and that should be reason enough. And it's not. And I think we can get stuck there when we take a traditional lens on communication, which we'd call the
Mhm.
transmission model, which is very much like I come up with what I want to say, I
Mm.
speak it at you, you take it in exactly as I intended it. Yay, communication, it happened. That's not
Mm.
anything close to what happens. There's so much more nuance and complexity there in the meaning we're making. And like, we said, we started, how are we arriving? The context, the stories that we're bringing with us into every interaction. And
Mm.
so I understand the wanting to, I wishing it wasn't true that it's better if the man does the inviting into the
Mhm.
space that's
Mhm.
constructed by patriarchy. I wish that wasn't true.
Right.
But it's kind of the like, okay, you want to change the system, but you need to function within, learn how to change
Mhm.
the system from inside the system. Then maybe you need that ally to support you and to be the messenger. And so taking this, CMM-ish perspective on communication, I think helps you not fight against that reality because you understand meaning is socially constructed. We're all co-creating together. Everybody's showing up with their own different stories. And so if I have any chance at all of speaking to you and connecting to you and helping you to understand me and seeking to understand you, then we are going to have to take this much more complex understanding of communication and what's going on here. And I
Mm.
think the practice in what I'm saying and what you're saying is it is making the implicit explicit. It is paying
Mm.
attention to the things that have been taken for granted and have felt invisible in these spaces. And so it is, I think, a learning practice for people. If you ask them to say, start paying attention to who's not there.
what you said about making things visible, you asked me a little bit about the steps. I want to give you
Mhm.
one example from a project I did
Please.
with the Consensus Building Institute. They're based in Cambridge, Mass. Fantastic institution. I worked with them on a project in Nigeria, and it was a project about better uses for oil and gas revenue. So it was literally oil and gas revenue for human development.
Mm.
And it was funded by the Ford Foundation. And what I remember, not just being in the room where there would be 200 Nigerians, myself and my partner, both of us, let's be honest, white people from Cambridge, Mass, right? Two of us, 200 of them.
Uh-huh.
That was an amazing experience that I will never forget. But what I really, really want to talk about here in this conversation was the run up. My partner, David, and I sat down and spent, as I recall, about 6 months building the participation.
Mm.
Now, you could say, oh, I don't have 6 months. Okay, everybody's meeting, everybody's process is different.
Yeah.
But in this instance, we not only made sure that we had people from the north of Nigeria and the south and the east and the west, which there is a very, very big deal for conflict. We made sure, of course, that we had women, but we had older and younger women. We
Mm-hmm.
had Muslim and Christian. We had able-bodied and we had all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we built and we built and we built and we crafted that meeting. We did not go into the room until we felt that the best approximation of the nation was present.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the group photo from that meeting, you will see women in Muslim clothing, attire attributed. You will see men, women, you will see it all. And you will see two white people from Cambridge, Mass. And it was a very beautiful photograph. And it was a great experience. And again, each case is different. And I know I speak a lot about the global situation, and you may have a more domestic audience, but the message is the same. Who's missing and
Mm-hmm.
how do we get them here? And I want to go one step further. There can be a little bit of a trend into, and you see this with quotas at the UN and things. Well, we got them there, right? These women, they're right there. Yeah, well, guess what? You ask them to take notes.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, that's one of my pet peeves.
Oh, yeah.
When I run a meeting, but this is a concrete suggestion. When I run a meeting and people do group work, I require, people don't like it, but I require that the men take the notes and that the women present.
Mm.
That day, maybe the day when I don't have to require that will go away, but we're not there yet. So just to say that meaningful participation is not sitting in the back taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
Meaningful participation is what these Pacific leaders like Tina Stege and others in the Marshall Islands, they're at the front.
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking notes, and they are participating in the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
That's meaningful participation.
You went exactly where I was going to take it, because I would say it's that, and it's the language, that we know we mean more when we're who's at the table. It's also who's talking at the table and who's being invited to speak at the table. And that's where a kind of communication design element would come in. And that's why it's important to pay attention to the invisible communication and dynamics and patterns that are happening around you, because you have the choice and the opportunity, again, when you have the tools and the language, to act into those moments in a way that does invite and create, sets the tone, sets the standard, or sets it as a norm that everybody gets to interact in this way. And so I'm curious to lean into dialogue a little more and say, the story you kind of just told was very much like, this is how we got people into the room. So when you're in that dialogue, I wonder if you have a story of that same experience or a different experience of what the actual participation and conversation and dialogue looks like as you invite more voices than have typically been invited to the table.
Yeah, that again is another one of those really sprawling kind of ideas, and I will take a crack at it, and I think I will stick, for now anyway, unless something else comes up, I'll stick with the Nigerian example. It's funny, in some places where women, and let's set aside girls for a minute because that's a separate, you have to
Yeah.
have a different process there. But in places where even in 2025, it is not common to have women in the room, getting them in the room, I almost want to say wasn't half the battle. That kind of was the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Because once they're in the room, they did the rest.
Mm.
They raised their hand, they did the talking, they were up here, they shared their ideas and all the things. There was an element that we did beforehand that I don't want to leave out. Not only were we very, very thoughtful about who we invited, we also did pre-meeting interviews.
Mm.
And the reason that matters is you led us off here at the top when you said about context. How are you arriving? Well, when you are creating a dialogue, it is almost, I would say, impossible to arrive well if you don't know the context for each person who's going to be coming into the room.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very thoughtful about who we invited. But in addition to who we invited, we interviewed enormous numbers of people, including the ones who were invited. But we had to do a lot of interviews to even figure out who could be invited.
Mm.
Again, you can't, obviously, you can't have the entire Nigerian nation around the table. So there is some, I hate to say it, selection involved. And in those interviews, we were looking for the people who, first of all, shared a commitment to listening.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about that. You
Yeah.
could invite an expert, an academic, or whatever. But if that person's MO was to come in and dominate the room, no, actually, no. You may be an academic,
Yeah.
you may be perfect, you may have credentials, but you're not going to be the right person.
Mm-hmm.
So getting them in the room, having that context, knowing how you're going to arrive, and then structuring a dialogue. And that's where you get into, I'm a mediator facilitator, and a trainer. So you get into the, how do you do working groups? How do you do breakout groups?
Mm-hmm.
The UN climate meetings, what is the side negotiation? The ones that happen in the hallway, how does that
Mm-hmm.
feed in? There are many, many layers to it. Too broad to get into here, but I would just say that the very, very thoughtful dynamics of getting people into the room, but then managing how a decision is made
Mm-hmm.
in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just going to be talking? You're just going to talk and end after 2 days? Do you have voting? Do you
Mm-hmm.
have consensus? What happened in my other one, and this is a model that the Consensus Building Institute is quite famous for. They have something called the mutual gains approach, which is basically mutually beneficial negotiations are better for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so far so good. But one element of their approach, the last stage is what could go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
You end the process, the dialogue, the conversation with spending some time on thinking about, we're no longer together. Our dialogue has ended. But what could go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How do we come back together if something does go wrong? And if
Mm-hmm.
it does go wrong, who's invited? I mean, you see this in War and
Yeah.
Peace. You sign a peace agreement, somebody else continues to drop bombs. What do we do now? So it's that beginning, middle, and end. So
Mm-hmm.
in addition to who's in the room, there's this idea of temporality,
Yeah.
that arc of time that matters a great deal in dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm so glad you bring up listening, because I always like to clarify when I'm talking about communication, it's not just the words we say, that when I'm talking about design, when I'm talking about setting a tone or a vibe for a group to be together and interact together, it is so much about listening. And that's so much of the behavior that gives people the permission to share their stories. And I like to even think of stories themselves like a tool, and like, what's the functionality of a story? And I just think it is empowerment, and it's expanding our imagination. And so that's why I see it
Mhm.
as being so important, because I think that is what we need right now, is imagination. And we need to
Mm,
be brave and explore new ideas and look at those things that we've taken for granted and make them visible. And I just
mm,
really um am, yeah, interested in that, and see what you're doing as being part of that imagination work of inviting people to
mm,
imagine new ways of being and new futures together. So I really
mm.
appreciate that. I hate to say we have to be wrapping up, but I'm
Yeah.
curious what stories or what you want to leave us with
Mm,
about any and everything we've talked about today. What haven't we touched on yet, or what's a story you want to
yeah.
share?
No, thank you, Abby. And I'm so glad you asked for that because I do have one more that is absolutely very near and dear to my heart, which is actually first I want to pick up with what you just said about we do need more imagination.
Hmm.
I want to agree with you wholeheartedly, but I also would couple imagination with courage
Yes.
because imagine you have imagination, but if you don't trust it, if you don't have the courage to
Yeah.
believe it, it's not going to it's not going to come to life.
Mm.
And I want everyone to have the courage of their convictions because what's happening right now again in the US context is a whole lot of what you think you know isn't true. La la la, nothing to see here. You're really not actually
Yeah.
suffering. No, no, no. We're fine. We've got this. You're not. No, every single human being needs to own their truth
Hmm.
and they need to know that what they truly believe and what they imagine for their future is worth it.
Hmm.
So that's on the US side. Now the story I want to leave you with is the following, and it echoes the story I told you from, if the story I told you earlier was in West Africa.
Hmm.
There is a professor who recently retired at Harvard Business School. And sorry, I'm realizing it's like a lot of Massachusetts in this podcast. So sorry. But it just so happens that, after apartheid ended, a lot of the conflict resolution tools all went to Harvard. So all props to them. But here's the story. There's a professor at Harvard, Kathleen McGinn, who recently retired. She took the Harvard Business School curriculum, worked with two other partners to take their negotiation curriculum and make it appropriate for young women, girls in Zambia. These young women were 12, are 12. Well, now they're not 12 anymore. And the idea was going in, if we could train these girls to negotiate to have safer sex,
Hmm.
that would help with the AIDS epidemic. So far, so good. But remember the story I told you about the extension volunteers?
Hmm.
The idea was we'll give them agricultural extension training, and then they ran off and literally ran for office.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in this story, the young women were trained in negotiation. And guess what happened? They started negotiating for all kinds of things,
Hmm.
including school fees. And the reason that matters to me is that when girls go to school, that has a direct impact on improving climate change because girls in school have fewer children by choice, not because we told, again, back to the patriarchy. We're
Hmm.
not telling them to have fewer children. They are educated and choosing. So when I met with Kathleen, I said, Kathleen, were you aware that this curriculum has a positive impact on the climate? And she was pretty blown away by it. She said, we talked
Hmm.
about safe sex. We talked about a lot of things. We didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
So that's a curriculum that I'm now using with other institutions and a nonprofit in Zimbabwe and other places, basically to say that if you start with the empowerment idea of women and girls, giving them voice and then helping them with the tools,
Hmm.
they run with it.
Yep.
We don't need to do anything, nor should we.
Hmm.
I, Mil, have no say in what you do with your empowerment. However, if I can help you get there, count me in.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that story. That's so, so wonderful. And I think that's, again, it's not like either of us came into this conversation saying we've got all the answers or we're going to,
Mm-hmm.
get through
Correct.
all this, solve it in an hour. But to me, the kind of exploration of it and the naming of things, again, I just think I think step one of empowerment is having the
Mm-hmm.
language to be able to describe something that you're experiencing, something that's happening so that you
Yeah.
can talk about it at all. And so I love that what you've just framed for us of the equipping, giving those tools. And then, you were just talking about the kind of sustainability of something like peace and the longevity of it. How do we make
Mm-hmm.
sure it lasts? And it is that, like, again, a CMM-ish perspective would say, like, you really do have to believe yourself to be an active participant empowered in your choices, and you get to do this participation. And that's, again, kind of idealized, but I do think it's because my lens is interpersonal communication. I am looking from, again, I talked about like systemic design, and it is interesting to think like from a zoomed out approach as well. Both are important, but I'm always coming, okay, in our interpersonal connections, how do we create change there? How do we empower ourselves there? And then kind of exactly a mirror of what you've shared. How does that ripple out from there to create even larger change in the world? And so to me, it just all does start with the interpersonal, and it's,
Mhm.
yeah, so important. So any final words, Mil, as we wrap up here? What do you want people to know or
Ah,
walk away with maybe as they leave this
mm.
conversation with us?
Yeah, actually, I will end with this. The solutions that we think will protect us from impending disaster and climate change are not the ones that work best. It is not the electric car. It is not the right light bulb. It is not porous pavement. Notice that these are all technology-driven, engineering-driven, and
Mm,
male-driven
mm,
solutions. The research is unequivocal that empowering women and girls combined, all the strategies related to that, come out as one of the top solutions to climate change. So there is a book that I've been working on related to answering the following question: is gender bias preventing us from addressing climate change? I say it is. Now, here's the trick: gender bias is baked in. It's very, very hard, like racial bias and all kinds of bias. It's hard to overcome. So what matters to me is all the things we've talked about together
mm-hmm.
here, which is getting the right people in the room and listening to what they say. If we can just do that, we're going to get where we need to go.
Mil, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time and
Abbie.
your perspective and your stories. It's been so wonderful to talk with you today.
Yeah, it's great, Abbie. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.